Imagine stepping onto a plane. Heart full of excitement, ready for a new journey, only to have your dignity snatched away in front of strangers. What would you do if a flight attendant decided you didn't belong in the seat you rightfully earned? Would you stay silent, shrink back, and accept it? Or would you rise, even as the world around you whispered that you didn't matter? This is not just a story about a seat. It's about justice at 35,000 feet. It's about a young woman's strength colliding with prejudice in the confined space of an airplane cabin. And it's about the question that lingers long after the flight is over. How many times in our lives are we asked to prove that we belong? Naomi Carter didn't choose to become the center of chaos that night, but what she chose next would change everything. Stay with me, because what happened on that flight will make you question not just the rules of an airline, but the values we all live by. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Naomi Carter stood at the gate with her boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand, as if the flimsy slip of paper carried the weight of her entire future. In a way, it did, at only 20 years old. Naomi had spent most of her life dreaming of this moment, the chance to step onto an international flight that would carry her across the ocean to the interview that could define the rest of her life. A scholarship, one of the most prestigious in the world, waited for her on the other side of the Atlantic. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heartbeat thundering beneath the fabric of her blazer. She told herself to breathe, but the recycled airport air was sharp, stale, and too thin to calm her racing thoughts. She rolled the handle of her carry-on back and forth, shifting from foot to foot, trying to ground herself in the ordinary motions of waiting. The terminal buzzed with its own symphony. The rolling clatter of suitcases across the polished floor, the disembodied voice of an announcer calling out flight numbers, the laughter of a family nearby. But for Naomi, every sound faded into the background, like an orchestra tuning up before the conductor raised the baton. She was the one about to step onto center stage. Naomi had grown up in Atlanta, in a neighborhood where neighbors looked out for one another, and where her mother, Angela Carter, had raised her with an iron will and an unshakable love. They did not have privilege or wealth, but what they had was resilience. Angela had always told her, "You belong anywhere your hard work takes you." Those words echoed now as Naomi studied her reflection in the glass wall of the terminal. She saw a young woman with long, neatly braided hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes bright and intelligent, her outfit carefully chosen, a soft gray blazer, dark jeans, and clean sneakers. She looked professional, but not stiff, serious, but still herself. And more than anything, she looked like someone who had earned her place in the world. Angela had insisted Naomi fly first class. It wasn't about luxury, it was about dignity. You're going to show up rested, prepared, and ready to conquer. Angela had said the night before, as she helped her daughter pack, "Don't you dare shrink yourself on that plane. You walk in there and you own it, because you've earned every inch of that seat." Those words gave Naomi strength, but they also made her nervous. She was stepping into a world she had glimpsed only in movies and magazine spreads, a world of champagne before takeoff. Plush seats that turned into beds, and passengers in tailored suits who seemed born to such privilege. Would she stand out? Would she be seen as out of place? She shook her head, brushing away the thought. No, she had worked for this. All those late nights hunched over textbooks, all those weekends spent volunteering, debating, writing essays, Every sacrifice had led to this moment. She was not a guest in this space. She was a rightful occupant. The announcement for her flight came over the speakers, and her breath caught in her throat. Global Wings Flight 327 nonstop service from Atlanta to Geneva. Now, board in first class. That was her flight, her seat, her chance. Naomi gathered her things and approached the gate. The boarding agent scanned the line, calling passengers forward. Naomi waited her turn, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She could already imagine herself sinking into the wide leather seat, tucking her notes into the side pocket, sipping water as she reviewed one last time for the interview. For a moment, her excitement drowned out the fear. But then, as she handed over her boarding pass, she felt the sharp prickling of eyes on her. Not the friendly gaze of another traveler, but the cold, assessing stare of someone looking for flaws. She glanced up and saw the lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile so tight it looked painful. Her name tag read Victoria Hale. Naomi felt a shiver, though she couldn't explain why. It was just a look, wasn't it? Just a moment's glance. She pushed the thought aside and smiled politely, thanking the gate agent as the scanner beeped and her boarding pass was cleared. She stepped into the jet bridge, her heart pounding harder with each step. This was it. She was crossing into her future. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin glowed softly with warm lighting. Plush leather seats curved around personal screens. There was a faint smell of fresh linen and citrus. Naomi paused for a moment, drinking in the sight. It was more beautiful than she had imagined. This wasn't just transportation. It was a world suspended in the sky, designed to remind its passengers that they mattered. She found her seat 1A by the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her bag and sat. She felt the buttery leather embrace her, and a rush of emotion welled up in her chest. She had made it. She was here. A flight attendant passed by, offering a tray with champagne flutes and glasses of orange juice. Naomi smiled and asked for water. The attendant nodded politely, setting the glass on her tray table. As Naomi sipped, she allowed herself to imagine the moment ahead, stepping into the grand hall in Geneva, shaking hands with the scholarship panel, speaking about her vision for the future. For the first time, she felt like she could truly see it, touch it. She glanced out the window, watching the lights of the airport twinkle against the night. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I belong here." But beneath that whisper, another thought lingered. She didn't know why, but the way Victoria Hale had looked at her unsettled her. There had been no words exchanged. Yet Naomi sensed something in those eyes not welcome, not warmth, something colder, sharper, like a warning of turbulence ahead. She tried to shake it off, focusing on the steady hum of passengers settling into their seats, the rustle of bags overhead, the low murmur of voices. Still, a knot remained in her stomach, quiet but undeniable. Naomi drew in a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Whatever waited ahead, she would face it. She had not come this far to be shaken by a glance. The cabin door closed with a soft thud. The plane was sealed, the journey set. Naomi pressed her hand once more to her chest and whispered, "For us, Mom, for everything you sacrificed." And with that, the engines began to roar. Naomi settled into her seat, trying to convince herself that everything was fine. The cabin had that hushed, almost reverent atmosphere of first class, where people spoke in low tones and the air seemed heavy with comfort and privilege. She ran her hand over the armrest, marveling at how smooth and polished it felt compared to the narrow, worn seats she had grown up with on domestic flights. This was more than travel. This was entry into a different world. She opened the folder in her bag, pulling out a set of notes she had carefully written for the interview. Her handwriting was neat, each point underlined, each quote highlighted. She wanted to review, but her eyes kept drifting to the details around her. The middle-aged man across the aisle unfolded his newspaper with practiced ease, his cufflinks catching the light. A young woman in a silk blouse typed quickly on her laptop, her nails clicking rhythmically against the keys. Everyone seemed so comfortable, as if this environment was second nature to them. Naomi sipped her water, trying to blend in, but then she felt it again, the stare. She looked up and saw Victoria Hale moving through the cabin. Victoria's blonde hair was set in place like armor, her lipstick precise, her uniform perfectly tailored. She carried herself with the air of someone who believed the cabin belonged to her, and, in a way, it did. Naomi watched as Victoria paused at each row, speaking softly to passengers, smiling as she adjusted a bag or offered a drink. The smile always reached her lips, but never her eyes. And when those eyes fell on Naomi, they sharpened. Naomi pretended to look at her notes, though her pulse quickened. She told herself it was nothing. Flight attendants checked on passengers all the time. Yet when Victoria approached, Naomi felt the air thicken. The woman leaned slightly closer, her tone polite but edged with something colder. "Good evening," Victoria said, her smile tight. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi blinked. She had already shown it at the gate. "Oh, sure." She reached into her bag and handed over the slip. Victoria held it between two manicured fingers, glancing at it, then at Naomi, then back again. Her eyes moved slowly, as if inspecting every detail for a flaw. "Seat 1A," Victoria said, drawing out the words, "first class." "Interesting." Naomi forced herself to smile. "Yes, my mother booked it for me. She wanted me to arrive well-rested for an important interview." Victoria's lips curved, but it wasn't kindness, it was condescension. "I see. And what is this interview for?" Naomi hesitated, caught off guard. "It's for a scholarship in Geneva." "Oh," Victoria said, as though the explanation clarified nothing at all. She handed the boarding pass back, her fingers lingering a moment too long, as if reluctant to release it. "Well, make yourself comfortable." Her voice had a sugary quality that only made Naomi's stomach twist. Naomi took the pass and tucked it quickly back into her folder. She exhaled slowly, trying to ignore the way Victoria's presence had unsettled her, but the thoughts began to creep in. Why had she asked again? Did she not believe Naomi belonged here? Was it unusual, in her mind, for someone like Naomi to be sitting in 1A? She tried to bury the doubts by focusing on her notes. Still, her eyes wandered to the aisle, where Victoria continued to move gracefully, pouring wine for one passenger, adjusting a blanket for another. The smiles came easily for them, but every time her gaze flicked back to Naomi, the smile seemed to fade, replaced by a flicker of skepticism. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Naomi felt it like a spotlight. As the crew prepared the cabin for departure, Naomi's chest grew tight. She thought of her mother again, Angela's words firm and reassuring. "You own that space? Don't let anyone make you feel small." Naomi whispered those words to herself under her breath, but the knot in her stomach remained. The engines roared to life, The plane pushed back from the gate, and the cabin tilted slightly as it turned toward the runway. Naomi gripped the armrests, trying to let the vibration of the plane steady her nerves. She reminded herself, this was just one woman. One look, one moment. She would not let it define her journey. But then, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated and the plane lifted from the ground, Victoria returned to her row. She crouched slightly so that her eyes were level with Naomi's. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice low but pointed. "I'll need to verify something about your ticket with the purser. Please keep it handy." Naomi blinked. "Is there a problem?" Victoria's smile widened, but it was sharp. "Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. We just like to be thorough." Naomi nodded, though her chest tightened further. She tried to focus on the soft hum of the engines, the lights of the city shrinking below. She tried to remind herself that she had nothing to hide. Her ticket was valid. Her seat was hers, but the unease gnawed at her. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Victoria did not return. Naomi watched the other attendants serve meals, pour wine, laugh softly with passengers. She felt her notes heavy in her lap, untouched. Her water glass stood empty, ignored. She kept replaying the moment in her head the way Victoria had asked. The emphasis on first class, the suspicion in her tone. Naomi folded her notes and slipped them back into her bag. She pressed her palms together, forcing herself to breathe deeply. She had to hold on to herself. She could not spiral into fear. Not here. Not now. But the voice inside whispered cruelly, "What if she tries to take it away from you? What if she thinks you don't belong?" She closed her eyes, remembering a night when she was 15, standing outside a boutique with her mother. The clerk had followed them through the store, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Angela had turned to Naomi and whispered, loud enough for the clerk to hear, "Smile, baby, let her watch. She can't stop us from buying what we came for." They had walked out with their heads high. Naomi had carried that lesson for years. Now, on this plane, thousands of feet above the ground, she tried to summon that same strength. She opened her eyes and straightened her back. Whatever Victoria Hale saw when she looked at her, Naomi knew the truth. She had earned this seat. She had earned this chance. But, deep down, she also knew this was only the beginning. The plane had leveled out at cruising altitude. The seatbelt light turned off with a soft chime, and the attendants began their quiet choreography through the aisles. The cabin was bathed in a dim golden glow, designed to soothe, to make even a 9-hour flight feel gentle. For most of the passengers, it worked. They opened laptops, sipped wine, reclined into plush comfort. But for Naomi Carter, the glow felt like a spotlight, and the quiet hum of the engines only amplified the thudding in her chest. She had tried to bury herself in her notes again, but the words blurred on the page. She kept glancing up, searching the aisle for Victoria Hale. When she finally appeared, walking with that same unyielding poise, Naomi felt her throat tighten. The woman's eyes swept across the cabin, checking seat belts, trays, blankets, and then, inevitably, they stopped on Naomi. Victoria approached with a tray in her hands, offering drinks. When she reached Naomi's row, she set the tray on the edge of the table with a grace that almost looked like care. Almost. But then her voice, low and sharp, cut into Naomi's composure. "Miss Carter," she said, her tone polite enough to deceive the passengers nearby, but heavy with something Naomi felt like a stone in her stomach. "Could you step into the galley with me for a moment? I need to discuss something about your ticket." Naomi froze. Around her, passengers sipped wine and clicked seatbelts as if nothing unusual was happening. But she felt every eye turned toward her, curiosity flickering in their glances. She swallowed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" It was scanned at the gate. Victoria tilted her head, that practiced smile flickering again. "It's just procedure. We've had irregularities before. I'd feel more comfortable confirming the details away from the cabin." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she slid her notes back into her bag. She rose from her seat, her knees unsteady, and followed Victoria down the narrow aisle. She could feel the stares burning into her back. Some curious, some pitying, others simply indifferent. But to Naomi, each gaze was a weight, pressing her down into the carpet. The galley was brightly lit, clinical, the clatter of glasses and trays echoing in the confined space. Victoria turned, holding Naomi's boarding pass between two fingers as though it might crumble. "Where exactly did you get this ticket?" she asked. The question was delivered with a calmness that only heightened its insult. Naomi blinked, stunned by the bluntness. "I told you. My mother purchased it. She wanted me rested for my scholarship interview." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "And what does your mother do?" Naomi's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't a casual question. It was a probe, a search for justification. "She works in media," Naomi answered, her voice clipped. "Media," Victoria repeated slowly, as though the word itself was suspicious. "And she bought you a first-class ticket to Europe." Naomi felt heat rising to her face. She clenched her fists at her sides. "Yes. Is there a reason you're questioning me?" Victoria's smile disappeared. "We've had fraudulent tickets before. People trying to upgrade themselves or use stolen cards. I have to protect this cabin." The words hit Naomi like a slap. Protect this cabin, as if she was a threat, as if her presence in seat 1A was an invasion. She took a sharp breath, forcing herself not to break. "My ticket is valid," she said, her voice low but steady. "It was purchased legally. You saw it scanned." Victoria's eyes gleamed with something close to satisfaction. "We'll see about that." She slipped the ticket into her pocket. "You can wait here until I confirm." Naomi's chest constricted. "Wait here," she repeated, disbelief flooding her. "This is my seat. My name is on that ticket." Victoria's tone hardened. "If you raise your voice, I will have no choice but to call security when we land. Do you understand?" Naomi stared at her, the world tilting. She could hear the muted sounds of passengers just beyond the curtain glasses clinking. Laughter, the murmur of conversation while she stood trapped in the harsh glow of the galley, accused and cornered. She swallowed, her throat raw. "You can't just take my ticket," she whispered. Victoria leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her eyes cold. "Watch me." Naomi's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all, the humiliation, the rage, the helplessness. She forced herself to turn away, back toward the cabin. But when she stepped out of the galley, the eyes were waiting. Passengers looked up from their seats, some with curiosity, some with disapproval, others with the faint glimmer of pity. None of them spoke, none of them intervened. Naomi walked back down the aisle, her head held high though her body trembled. She slipped into her seat, staring out the window, the glass cool against her temple. She told herself she wouldn't cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears. But the humiliation burned, hot and unrelenting. She thought of her mother, of Angela's voice telling her she belonged. She thought of all the nights she had studied until her eyes blurred, all the mornings she had woken before dawn to chase this dream. And now, one woman's prejudice was threatening to take it all away. The curtain rustled. Victoria returned to the cabin, her smile back in place. She moved gracefully, addressing passengers with warmth, but when her eyes flicked to Naomi, the warmth vanished. She leaned to a man a few rows back, speaking quietly. Naomi couldn't hear the words, but she saw the man's surprise, then his slow, pleased nod. Naomi's heart dropped. She knew, without hearing, what was happening. Victoria was preparing to give her seat away. Her chest tightened, a scream rising in her throat, but she pressed her lips together, forcing it down. She felt the sting of injustice seep into her bones. Her hands clenched the armrest until her knuckles turned white. This was more than suspicion now. This was erasure. Victoria had looked at her and decided she did not belong, and the cabin, silent and complicit, seemed to agree. Naomi closed her eyes, forcing air into her lungs. She whispered the words again, the mantra her mother had given her. I belong here. But this time, the words trembled. The humiliation had taken root, and she knew this was only the beginning. The hum of the aircraft felt louder now, as if the engines themselves sensed the tension brewing inside the cabin. Naomi sat stiffly in her seat, staring out the window but not seeing the endless stretch of clouds. Her mind was racing. The humiliation in the galley still clung to her skin, and though she tried to steady her breathing, every inhale caught in her throat. She pressed her fingers into her lap, forcing herself not to tremble. She could feel Victoria Hale's movements without even looking. The woman's presence radiated through the cabin, a sharp contrast to the quiet efficiency of the other attendants. Naomi had the sense of being hunted, of being marked as the one passenger whose legitimacy was under question. And then it happened. Victoria stepped into the aisle, her voice carrying in a way that seemed polite on the surface but deliberately loud enough for the cabin to hear. Miss Carter, she called, pausing beside Naomi's seat. I need to ask you to stand for a moment. Naomi turned, her eyes wide. Stand, why Victoria's smile was thin, her tone laced with false courtesy. There seems to be a discrepancy with your ticket. Until it's resolved, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate this seat. The words crashed through Naomi like a wave of ice water, her chest constricted, her throat dry. My ticket is valid, she said, her voice shaking but audible. I showed it at the gate. I showed it to you. This is my seat. Victoria clasped her hands in front of her, her expression one of professional patience. But the edge in her eyes betrayed something harsher. Miss Carter, we cannot allow passengers to occupy seats under false pretenses. If you'll please gather your belongings, I'll find you another place to sit. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Naomi felt them pressing in on her, invisible fingers pointing, eyes widening, whispers hissing just loud enough to sting. She gripped the armrest, every muscle in her body screaming not to move. This isn't a mistake, Naomi said firmly, though her voice cracked. My mother purchased this seat. You have no right to take it from me. A man across the aisle folded his newspaper, frowning. The young woman with the laptop glanced up, her eyes flicking between Naomi and Victoria. But no one spoke. No one interfered. The silence was as suffocating as the confrontation itself. Victoria's smile tightened. If you refuse, Miss Carter, I will have to involve the captain. Please don't make this more difficult." Naomi's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if the whole cabin could hear it. She wanted to scream, to demand why she was being singled out, why her right to this seat was being questioned. But the words caught in her throat, tangled in the thick web of humiliation. She could feel her cheeks burning, her vision blurring at the edges. "Why are you doing this?" Naomi whispered. It was less a question for Victoria than a plea to the universe, to anyone who might step forward. What have I done to deserve this? Victoria leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping just enough for only Naomi to hear. "Some people don't belong where they put themselves. I'm just doing my job." The cruelty of it pierced Naomi deeper than the public display. She felt her lungs seize, her body trembling despite her effort to stay composed. She wanted to rise, to walk away with dignity, but her body refused. Standing would feel like surrender. At that moment, a voice broke the silence. An elderly man in the second row, his silver hair catching the cabin light, his posture upright with quiet dignity, spoke. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I've flown this airline for 30 years. I've never seen a passenger treated this way." The young lady showed her ticket. I saw it with my own eyes. Why is she being asked to leave her seat? The cabin fell into a deeper silence, all eyes snapping to Victoria. Naomi turned too, her breath caught in her chest. For the first time, someone had spoken. Someone had dared to challenge the unspoken authority of the flight attendant. Victoria's smile faltered. She straightened, her composure cracking for a split second before she regained it. "Thank you for your concern, sir," she said, her voice taut. "But this is a matter of procedure." The man shook his head. Procedure or prejudice? Because to the rest of us it looks very much like the latter. A murmur swept through the cabin again. Stronger this time, voices rising like a tide Naomi hadn't expected. She felt her chest loosen slightly, hope flickering in the darkness of humiliation. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she pressed on. "I will be reporting this to the captain. Until then, Miss Carter, I must insist that you relocate." Naomi's body was frozen. Her hands trembled, her vision blurred with unshed tears. Yet, beneath it all, a spark of anger ignited. She heard her mother's voice again, not soft this time, but fierce. "Don't you dare shrink. Don't let them take from you what you've earned." Naomi rose slowly from her seat, her body trembling but her chin lifted. She faced Victoria, her voice low but sharp with conviction. "You can try to move me, but this seat is mine. I earned it. I paid for it, and I belong here as much as anyone else." The words rang louder than she expected, cutting through the cabin air. For a moment, everything stilled. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade into silence. Passengers turned their heads, wide-eyed, waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria's expression hardened, the smile vanishing completely. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well," she said coldly. "I will escalate this to the captain. Don't move." She turned sharply and strode down the aisle, disappearing behind the curtain. The silence she left behind was thick, heavy with judgment and unease. Some passengers avoided Naomi's gaze, shifting in their seats. Others stared openly, curiosity mingling with discomfort. But one or two gave her the smallest nods, silent acknowledgments that they had seen and they understood. Naomi lowered herself back into the seat, her body shaking with adrenaline. She stared at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. She had stood her ground, but the humiliation lingered. Her chest felt raw, her throat sore from holding back tears. The humiliation wasn't just private, now it was public, seared into the memory of every passenger in that cabin. She closed her eyes and whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "I belong here." But now the words sounded like a battle cry rather than a mantra, fragile but fierce. The elderly man leaned slightly toward her. His voice was quiet, kind. "You did nothing wrong. Remember that." Naomi looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. She nodded once, unable to speak. But deep inside, she knew the battle was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The plane sliced through the night sky, its cabin glowing with muted golden lights. But to Naomi, it felt like she was trapped in a cage made of glass and whispers. She sat frozen in her seat, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her pulse loud in her ears. Around her, first-class passengers reclined comfortably, sipping wine or tapping at laptops, yet she felt every glance like a blade. Some were curious, others indifferent, a few sharp with judgment, and each one reminded her that she had been put on display, accused in front of them all. Naomi leaned her head against the cool window, staring at the endless dark beyond the glass. The clouds below looked soft, almost like home could be resting just beneath them. But home felt impossibly far away. She thought of her mother, Angela, and how easily she would have handled this confrontation. Angela never faltered, never let anyone diminish her. Naomi wondered if she'd inherited enough of that strength, or if she was failing under the weight of it. Her throat ached from holding back tears. She whispered to herself again, the mantra that was beginning to feel like both salvation and burden. "I belong here. I belong here." The words filled the space between her breaths, but they did little to soothe the sting of humiliation. She had spoken boldly to Victoria in front of the cabin, but now, in the quiet aftermath, shame clawed at her. Her courage had cost her, and she could feel the eyes still on her, judging. She thought back to her childhood, to moments that felt eerily similar. At 10 years old, she had stood in line for ice cream with her mother. A woman behind the counter had leaned forward, ignoring her, and asked Angela, "Are you sure she has money for this?" The memory still burned, though Angela had calmly placed the bills on the counter and said, "She has more than enough. Thank you." Naomi had learned then what it meant to be questioned, what it meant to be doubted simply for existing where someone thought she shouldn't. Tonight, the lesson returned, harsher than ever. The curtain rustled, and Victoria reappeared in the cabin. Naomi tensed. The woman's smile was back, polished, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. She leaned toward the man a few rows back, Daniel Wright. Naomi overheard someone whisper. He was well-dressed, his tailored suit speaking of wealth, his watch gleaming like a badge of status. Victoria bent close to him, speaking softly, but Naomi caught enough to know, a replacement. He would be taking her seat. Her stomach dropped. The humiliation deepened into despair, pressing down on her chest until breathing felt like drowning. She dug her nails into her palms, fighting the urge to scream. She thought of the scholarship interview, of how much depended on this trip, and the cruel irony of being denied dignity before even reaching her destination. Was this the world reminding her that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how high she reached, she would always be pulled back down? Bennett leaned forward slightly, his voice soft enough that only Naomi could hear. "Don't let her break you," he murmured. His eyes, kind but steady, met hers. "I've seen this before. You're stronger than she knows." Naomi swallowed, her throat raw. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she had the strength to endure this without shattering. But the fight within her was vicious. A voice inside whispered that maybe she should give in. Maybe it wasn't worth the struggle. She could sit quietly in another seat, survive the flight, and still reach Geneva. Wouldn't that be enough? But another voice rose stronger, fiercer. It sounded like Angela's. "Don't let them teach you to shrink. Don't let them teach you to accept less than what you've earned." Naomi pressed her palms to her knees, grounding herself. Her body trembled, but her spirit fought to stay upright. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine her mother's face, the look of determination that never faltered. Angela had always said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, it's standing anyway." She opened her eyes and stared at the empty glass on her table. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the window. Her own eyes wide and tired, but burning with something unyielding. She whispered again, stronger this time, "I belong here." Yet despair was cunning. It returned in waves, pulling her down, whispering that her words meant nothing in the face of power. She watched as Victoria handed Daniel a glass of champagne, her laughter light and false, her body angled toward him like he was royalty. Naomi's chest tightened again, her body caught between fury and helplessness. She wondered how much further this would go. Would Victoria drag her out of the seat? Would the captain support her? Would the other passengers speak up, or would silence reign again? The questions clawed at her until she could hardly sit still. She considered calling her mother, but the shame of admitting what was happening felt too heavy. What would Angela think? Would she be disappointed that Naomi hadn't stopped it sooner, that she had let the humiliation unfold so far, or would she understand? Would she unleash the storm that Naomi could not? Naomi pressed her fingers to her temple, closing her eyes tightly. Her thoughts spiraled. She imagined arriving in Geneva with this weight on her chest. Her confidence shattered before the interview even began. She imagined standing before the committee, her voice shaking, her dream slipping away. Despair painted every picture in shades of failure. She exhaled sharply, fighting it. No, she wouldn't let Victoria decide her worth. She wouldn't let despair write the end of this story. Still, tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to let them fall in this cabin, not in front of Victoria, not in front of anyone. She would not give them that victory. Mr. Bennett's hand rested gently on the armrest between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was enough, an anchor in the storm. "You're not alone," he whispered. Naomi looked at him, and in his eyes she saw not pity, but solidarity. It was enough to remind her that despair wasn't absolute, that even in the darkness, there could be light. She straightened slightly, lifting her chin. The despair was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it a fire burned. She would endure this. She would fight if she had to, and she would not let them erase her. Outside, the plane cut through the night, steady and unyielding. Naomi pressed her hand to the window, feeling the vibration of the engines, the power that kept them aloft. She whispered one last time, not as a plea but as a promise. "I belong here." Angela Carter had just finished rinsing her coffee mug when the phone on the counter buzzed. It was late, past midnight in New York, but she was still awake, her mind restless with thoughts of her daughter flying thousands of feet above the ocean. She had insisted on staying up until she knew Naomi's flight was steady, safe, but when she saw her daughter's name flash on the screen, a sudden dread tightened in her chest. She answered immediately. "Naomi, sweetheart, are you okay?" There was silence for a moment, only the muffled hum of an airplane in the background. Then Naomi's voice came, soft, trembling. "Mom, she took my ticket." Angela's grip on the phone tightened, her free hand curling into a fist against the counter. "What do you mean?" "She took it." "Who did the flight attendant?" Naomi whispered. "She said my seat isn't mine. She said there's a problem. She's given it to someone else. Everyone saw. Mom, they think I don't belong here." Angela closed her eyes, a storm brewing behind her calm exterior. She could hear the pain in Naomi's voice, the kind of pain she had feared her daughter would encounter in the world, the pain of being told she was out of place. Angela's voice, however, was steady, controlled. "Listen to me, Naomi. Breathe. You did nothing wrong. You belong in that seat." "I tried to fight," Naomi said, her breath hitching, "but she keeps saying the captain will make me move. I don't know what to do. Everyone's staring. I just—" Her voice broke, dissolving into silence. Angela's heart ached, but she did not let the fury in her chest spill into her tone. Instead, she steadied it, turning her pain into steel. "Naomi, I want you to listen carefully. You hold your head high. Don't let her see you break. I'll handle this." Naomi sniffed softly on the other end. "But Mom, what if—" "No what ifs," Angela interrupted gently but firmly. "I've got you. Do you hear me? I've got you." When she ended the call, Angela stood for a moment in the quiet kitchen, her reflection caught in the window above the sink. The city lights flickered faintly outside, but her mind was already elsewhere, focused on one thing: justice. She would not let anyone reduce her daughter to tears in a cabin she had rightfully earned a seat in. Not tonight, not ever. She moved quickly, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. She picked up her second phone, the one she rarely used except for work emergencies, and scrolled to a name she had hoped never to call for personal reasons. Richard Coleman, Vice President of Operations at the very airline Naomi was flying with. Angela had crossed paths with him during her years in media, interviewing him for a profile piece. She remembered his smooth professionalism, his careful choice of words, his eagerness to maintain the airline's reputation. She also remembered the quiet respect he had shown her, respect she would now leverage. The phone rang twice before a groggy male voice answered. "Angela, it's late. Is everything all right?" Angela didn't waste time. "No. Richard, everything's not all right. My daughter's on one of your flights, Flight 714 to Geneva. She was seated in first class, seat 1A, and one of your attendants has accused her of not belonging there. She took her ticket. Richard took it, and now she's humiliating her in front of the cabin." The silence on the line was heavy, filled with the weight of Angela's fury. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was sharper, alert now. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation." Angela snapped. "It's happening, right now. I just got off the phone with Naomi. Do you understand what this means, Richard? Do you understand what it does to a young woman to be humiliated, to be told she doesn't belong because of the color of her skin?" Richard exhaled audibly. "Angela." I know. She cut him off. You don't get to explain. You don't get to hesitate. You're the vice president of this airline. You are responsible. I want this corrected. Immediately. Or every contact I've ever made, every platform I have, will hear about it by morning. This isn't just customer service. Richard, this is a matter of dignity. And you know it. Her words were calm, but carried the weight of a hammer. She had spent her life wielding words like weapons when necessary, and tonight, her voice was her daughter's shield. Richard hesitated only a moment longer before responding. His voice resigned but urgent. I'll handle it. I'll contact the flight directly. Angela. I'm sorry. Angela's jaw tightened. Don't apologize to me. Fix this for Naomi. When she hung up, Angela stood still again, her chest rising and falling with the remnants of rage. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 1 a.m, but sleep was impossible now. She poured herself another cup of coffee, her mind sharp with resolve. Her daughter was thousands of miles above the Atlantic, but Angela's presence would be felt in that cabin. She would not allow Naomi to feel alone. On the plane. Naomi sat hunched in her seat, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her mother's voice still echoed in her ears, steady, commanding, protective. It was like a lifeline thrown across the sky, pulling her back from the depths of despair. She replayed the words, "You belong in that seat. Don't let her see you break. I'll handle this." Naomi closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a flicker of relief. Her mother was moving mountains. She knew it. Angela had a way of turning fury into action, and Naomi trusted that strength more than anything. Still, the humiliation lingered. Around her, passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others sneaking glances that made Naomi's skin crawl. She felt exposed, raw, as though the cabin lights were too bright, spotlighting her every breath. But she straightened slightly, lifting her chin. She wasn't alone anymore. Angela's resolve was already in motion, a force far stronger than Victoria Hale's thin smile or Daniel Wright's satisfied smirk. Naomi pressed her hands together in her lap, whispering softly to herself once more, "I belong here." Her voice no longer sounded like a plea. It sounded like a promise. Richard Coleman stared at his phone long after Angela hung up. The words she had hurled at him still echoed in his mind, heavy and sharp. He had known Angela Carter professionally years ago, and even then, he had sensed her relentless drive. Tonight, though, her voice had carried something deeper, a mother's fury, an unbreakable demand for justice. He rubbed his temples, glancing at the clock on his nightstand. It was nearly 1:15 but exhaustion couldn't compete with the urgency gnawing at him. A scandal of this nature, left unchecked, could cripple the airline. More importantly, it was wrong. He had built his career on smoothing over turbulence, on ensuring passengers felt safe and respected. If Angela's account was true, then one of his employees had violated the very core of their values. He reached for his laptop, its screen casting a pale glow across the dark room, and began typing furiously. Within minutes, he had pulled up the operations dashboard, locating Flight 713 en route to Geneva. The plane was steady, cruising at 35,000 feet, but Richard's pulse raced as though he were the one navigating storm clouds. He picked up his phone again, dialing a secure internal line. It rang once before a crisp voice answered. "This is Control. It's Coleman. he said quickly. "Patch me through to the flight's captain. Now." There was a brief pause. "Yes, sir. Stand by." Richard drummed his fingers against the desk as static filled the line. Finally, a calm, baritone voice came through. "This is Captain Reynolds. Captain, this is Richard Coleman, VP of Operations. I've just been made aware of a serious issue on your flight. A passenger in first-class seat 1A has been harassed and displaced by your lead attendant. Do you have knowledge of this?" The captain hesitated. "Mr. Coleman, I've received a report of a ticket discrepancy from Ms. Hale, our lead flight attendant. She claims the passenger in 1A cannot produce a valid document." Richard felt his jaw tighten. "That passenger has a valid ticket. I want it clearly understood under no circumstances is she to be removed from her seat. Do you copy that, Captain?" "Yes, sir," the captain replied, his voice careful now. "I'll address the matter immediately." "Good," Richard said, "and make a note of this. Any further harassment by Ms. Hale will be grounds for disciplinary action pending investigation. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Richard ended the call, exhaling heavily. For a moment, he allowed himself to lean back, staring at the ceiling. But this was only the first step. Angela Carter would not settle for half measures, and neither would he. He opened another line, this time to Sophia Ramirez, the airport manager in Geneva. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "Sophia here. Sophia, it's Richard. Sorry to wake you, but this is urgent. Flight 71 Tier is inbound to your airport. There's a developing incident involving one of our passengers, Naomi Carter. Seat 1A. She's being harassed by our staff. When that flight lands, I want a manager at the gate. Not just any manager, you. And I want you prepared to issue a formal apology on behalf of the airline." "Understood." Sophia sat up straighter in her bed, her voice sharpening. "Understood. I'll be there myself. Should I prepare suspension papers?" "Don't wait," Richard said. "By the time that plane lands, the paperwork will already be on your desk." When he ended the call, Richard finally allowed himself to breathe. He had set the wheels in motion. Naomi Carter might not know it yet, but justice was barreling toward her cabin seat at 600 miles an hour. On the plane. Naomi sat motionless, staring at her folded hands. Victoria Hale moved briskly up and down the aisle, her smile still fixed, though her eyes darted more than before. Something in her demeanor had shifted an unease she tried to mask but couldn't quite conceal. Naomi noticed it, though she didn't understand why. Mr. Bennett leaned closer again, his voice gentle. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. Naomi looked at him, puzzled. "Feel what?" "The change," he said simply. "It's subtle, but it's there. The tide's turning." Naomi wanted to believe him, but the weight of humiliation still clung to her. Her phone lay heavy in her lap, her mother's voice still echoing in her ears. Angela had promised to handle it, and if there was one thing Naomi had learned in her 20 years, it was that Angela Carter never made promises lightly. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if even her mother's reach wasn't enough? What if Victoria won, and she ended this flight in shame? The questions swirled, threatening to drag her back into despair. But then she saw the curtain at the front of the cabin swayed, and Captain Reynolds emerged. The murmur of passengers quieted instantly as he stepped into the aisle. His tall frame, crisp uniform, and calm authority commanded attention. He walked directly to Naomi's seat, his expression solemn but not unkind. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I've reviewed the situation. Your ticket is valid. You are entitled to this seat, and you will not be asked to move again. On behalf of the airline, I apologize for the distress you've experienced." Naomi blinked, her lips parting in shock. The captain's words washed over her, warm and unexpected, unraveling the knot of fear in her chest. Victoria, standing a few feet behind, paled visibly. "Captain, if I may, you may not," the captain interrupted firmly, his eyes narrowing. "Return to your duties, Ms. Hale." The weight of his words silenced the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, whispers rising like ripples on a pond. Some looked at Naomi with sympathy, others with newfound respect. Naomi's body trembled, not with fear now, but with relief. She inhaled deeply, her lungs filling fully for the first time since the ordeal began. She turned her face toward the window, not to hide tears this time, but to conceal the small, defiant smile tugging at her lips. "Mr. Bennett leaned closer once again, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "See, the tide has turned." Naomi nodded slowly. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to believe it, but even as she settled back into her seat, a new awareness prickled at her skin. This wasn't over. Something deeper had been set in motion, something larger than just her seat on this plane. She could feel it in the silence that followed the captain's announcement, in the simmering tension etched across Victoria's face. Justice had found its footing, but conflict was far from finished. The cabin air had changed. It was no longer just the hum of engines and the muted clink of glassware. It was charged, alive with tension. Naomi felt it the moment the captain's words settled into silence. Around her, passengers shifted, their eyes darting between her, the captain, and Victoria Hale. The hum of whispers grew louder, no longer discreet, as though people were deciding how much longer they could pretend to ignore what was happening. Naomi sat straighter, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Relief had washed through her when the captain had confirmed her right to the seat. But it was quickly followed by the uncomfortable reality that she was still the center of unwanted attention. She could feel the heat of it pressing against her skin judgment, curiosity, sympathy. Some gazes softened, while others hardened, their sharp edges cutting at her dignity. Victoria, standing stiffly near the galley curtain, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her uniform, though she tried to disguise it as composure. The captain's rebuke had been public and absolute, and for a woman who thrived on control, the humiliation was unbearable. Still, she wasn't finished. Naomi could see it in the rigid line of her jaw, the way her gaze lingered on her like an unspoken threat. "Unbelievable," muttered a passenger across the aisle, a man in a business suit who had been watching intently. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "First class is supposed to be comfortable. Instead, we're dealing with this." Naomi's stomach twisted, but before she could respond, Mr. Bennett leaned forward, his voice firm and steady. "This young woman has every right to be here. More right than you, if you think comfort is only for a select few." The man raised his brows, his lips curling into a sneer. "I didn't say she didn't belong. I'm just saying this drama is disrupting everyone else's peace. Maybe if she handled herself differently, we wouldn't all be in the middle of it." Naomi's chest tightened, shame threatening to resurface, but she forced herself to breathe through it. She had promised herself not to shrink, not to disappear into silence. She turned her head slightly, her voice calm but carrying. "I didn't start this. I didn't choose to be humiliated. I'm just trying to sit in the seat I paid for." Her words hung in the air, soft but unyielding. A woman 2 rows ahead shifted in her seat, glancing back with a faint nod of support. Victoria seized the moment, stepping forward, her smile once again plastered in place. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said smoothly, "we apologize for any inconvenience. We're working to ensure everyone is comfortable. But rest assured, this matter has been handled." The words were meant to soothe, but instead they stoked the tension further. A younger passenger near the front spoke up, his voice edged with anger. "Handled you tried to kick her out of her seat for no reason. That's not handled. That's abuse of power." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Victoria's cheeks flushed crimson, though she forced her voice into a saccharine tone. "Sir, I assure you, our procedures." Procedures interrupted another passenger, a woman clutching her wine glass, or prejudice. The word dropped like a stone in the still air, and suddenly the cabin felt smaller, tighter. Naomi's breath caught. It was the word everyone had been dancing around, but now it was spoken aloud, undeniable. Victoria's mask cracked, her eyes flared with indignation, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Excuse me." "You heard me," the woman said boldly, setting down her glass. "You saw a young black woman in first class and decided she couldn't possibly belong here, and you tried to humiliate her in front of all of us. That's not procedure. That's prejudice." The silence that followed was thunderous. Naomi's heart pounded, her throat thick with emotion. She hadn't expected anyone to speak so plainly, to call it what it was. A flicker of gratitude stirred within her chest, tempered by the raw vulnerability of having her pain so publicly named. Victoria's voice dropped, icy and sharp. "That is a serious accusation. I suggest you mind your words." "No, Mr. Bennett said firmly, his voice carrying across the cabin. "What's serious is abusing authority. What's serious is trying to strip a young woman of her dignity. And what's serious is thinking no one would notice." The tension erupted into a wave of voices. Some passengers murmured agreement, while others grumbled about delays and disturbances. Naomi sat in the center of it all, her heart racing. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the leather seat and vanish. But she also wanted to stand, to shout, to seize this moment and claim her right to exist without apology. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to steady herself. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't let them teach you to shrink." When she opened her eyes, she found Victoria staring at her, fury etched into her face. But, for the first time, Naomi wasn't afraid of that look. She saw through it, past the polished uniform and forced smile, to the insecurity beneath. Victoria had lost control of the cabin. She had lost the narrative, and Naomi was still in her seat. The curtain rustled again, and a different attendant slipped into the aisle, his face tight with unease. He approached Victoria, leaning close to whisper something Naomi couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it drained the color from her cheeks. Naomi's pulse quickened. She didn't know what message had just been delivered, but she sensed the shift. It was as though invisible hands were tightening around Victoria's power, pulling it away from her, one thread at a time. Passengers continued to murmur, some now openly watching Victoria with suspicion. Naomi glanced toward the window. her reflection pale but resolute. For the first time in hours, she felt the balance of power shifting not fully, not yet, but enough to give her hope. Mr. Bennett leaned close again, his voice soft but filled with certainty. Do you feel it now? The tide's not just turning, it's rising. Naomi exhaled slowly, her body trembling with a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She didn't know what would come next. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin had become a battlefield, and the fight was no longer just hers to carry. Naomi could feel every second stretch into an eternity. The tension inside the cabin hadn't eased. If anything, it had thickened, clinging to every breath. Whispers still darted back and forth, some in her defense, others impatient for the flight to quiet down. But beneath it all, Naomi sensed something larger brewing, like a storm pressing against the fuselage, waiting to break. Victoria Hale hadn't spoken in several minutes. She stood stiffly by the galley, her arms crossed too tightly, her expression brittle. The other attendant who had whispered to her earlier remained close by, his eyes flickering nervously between Naomi and the lead attendant. He looked like someone carrying a message too heavy for his shoulders. Then the intercom crackled. Every head lifted, the air electrified with anticipation. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking," came the steady voice from the flight deck. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I want to take a moment to clarify a matter that has caused some disruption. Passenger Naomi Carter, seated in 1A, holds a valid first-class ticket. She's entitled to remain in her seat for the duration of this flight. Any previous statements to the contrary were incorrect and do not reflect our airline standards. On behalf of the crew, I apologize for the distress caused." The captain's words reverberated through the cabin, more powerful than any whisper or glare. For a heartbeat, silence followed thick, stunned silence. Then came a ripple of murmurs, louder this time. Not whispers, but open voices. Some expressed sympathy, others outrage, a few relief that the ordeal might finally end. Naomi sat frozen, her throat tightening. The validation she had longed for, the acknowledgement that she belonged, that she had been wronged, was finally spoken aloud, and yet it felt almost surreal. Her chest trembled as she drew in a shaky breath. Tears pricked her eyes, not from weakness but from the weight of release. Beside her, Mr. Bennett smiled warmly. "Justice," he murmured, as though naming a long-lost friend who had finally arrived. But the moment of relief was not shared by everyone. Victoria's face had drained of color, her lips pressed into a razor-thin line. For a woman who had built her authority on unshakable control, the captain's announcement was nothing short of public defeat. The younger attendant stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Ms. Hale, the ground manager is patched through. They want to speak with you. Now." Naomi blinked, startled. The ground manager. That meant someone on the ground was watching, listening, intervening in real time. Her heart thudded as the attendant handed Victoria a headset. Victoria hesitated, her fingers twitching as though the device burned her skin. Slowly, she placed it over her ears, her voice barely audible as she muttered a greeting. Naomi couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see the effect, the stiffening of Victoria's spine, the tremor in her hand, the way her forced smile collapsed entirely. Passengers openly watched now, no longer pretending indifference. The performance was over. The mask had shattered. Whatever words came through that headset, They carved into Victoria's composure, stripping her down in front of everyone. Finally, she removed the headset, her hand trembling. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, her eyes darting toward the floor. The other attendant stepped forward, his voice clear enough for the cabin to hear. Effective immediately. Ms. Hale is relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight. Gasps swept through the aisle. A woman a few rows ahead whispered, "They suspended her." Right here, Naomi's breath caught, her heart hammering. She hadn't expected this, hadn't dared to imagine consequences unfolding in real time, mid-air, in front of every witness. Victoria stood frozen, her face pale and stricken. For a moment, she looked less like the commanding figure who had humiliated Naomi and more like someone suddenly small, cornered. She glanced around the cabin, as though searching for an ally, but found only wary stares. "Please, return to the galley," the younger attendant said firmly. His tone carried no malice, only the authority of someone following direct orders. Victoria's heels clicked softly against the aisle as she retreated, her once confident stride reduced to something stiff and brittle. The curtain swayed behind her, closing with a finality that seemed to echo through the cabin. Naomi sat in stunned silence, her pulse racing. She had fought to hold her dignity, to survive humiliation without crumbling. Now, watching the woman who had tormented her face such public consequences, she didn't feel triumph so much as disbelief. It was overwhelming, almost too much to process in the tight confines of the seat. Her phone buzzed softly in her lap. She glanced down and saw her mother's name flashing. Her hands shook as she answered. Naomi Angela's voice was steady, strong. They suspended her." "Mom," Naomi whispered, her throat thick, "right here, on the plane." Angela exhaled sharply, the sound edged with satisfaction. "Good. That's what happens when people forget that dignity isn't theirs to take." "Are you okay?" Naomi swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I think so. It's just a lot." Angela's voice softened. "I know, baby, but you're stronger than this moment. Stronger than what they tried to make you feel. Hold on a little longer. When you land, there will be people waiting to make this right." Naomi closed her eyes, pressing the phone closer to her ear, soaking in her mother's steadiness like oxygen. "I love you too," Angela replied firmly, "and I'm proud of you." When Naomi ended the call, she sat in silence, the hum of the engines filling her ears. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted again, not gone quiet. Not entirely, but transformed. Passengers spoke more freely now, their voices weaving a tapestry of reactions. Some muttered about consequences finally catching up. Others sighed about drama in the skies. A few even offered Naomi small nods, gestures of respect. For the first time since the nightmare began, Naomi didn't feel like prey. She wasn't invisible, nor was she the object of whispered doubts. She was simply a passenger again, seated in 1A, on her way to a future she refused to surrender. Mr. Bennett leaned closer, his eyes kind. "Justice descended tonight," he said softly. "Not perfect, not complete, but enough to remind us it's still possible." Naomi's throat tightened, but she managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. As she looked out the window, the endless dark sky stretched before her, vast and unbroken. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the morning waited, and with it, a new chapter, one where she would carry not just the memory of humiliation, but the knowledge that justice, fragile and fleeting as it might be, could still find its way into the most unlikely places. Even at 35,000 feet, Naomi sat perfectly still, her body pressed against the leather of seat 1A as if it alone could anchor her. The hum of the engines vibrated through her bones, a steady reminder that the world outside was still moving, still vast, still indifferent to the storm that had raged inside this cabin. Victoria was gone. The curtain had closed behind her like the final act of a play, the villain retreating from the stage. And yet, Naomi didn't feel triumphant. Relief, yes. Vindication, maybe, but triumph. That word felt too loud, too sharp, for the exhaustion weighing her down. Passengers still whispered, their voices weaving in and out of her thoughts like smoke she couldn't escape. Some were on her side, she could feel it in the glances of quiet support, the sympathetic nods. But others weren't. She caught the stiff posture of the businessman across the aisle, his expression sour, as though her ordeal had been nothing more than an inconvenience to his comfort. She noticed the woman who sighed loudly, muttering about people making everything about race. Their words didn't land softly. They pierced. They reminded Naomi that while Victoria's authority had been stripped, the prejudice fueling her actions didn't vanish with her suspension. It lingered, quiet, unrepentant, in the minds of those who thought Naomi's pain was drama. She clenched her hands in her lap, her nails pressing crescents into her palms. Her mother's voice rang in her head, "Don't let them teach you to shrink." And so, she lifted her chin, just slightly, enough to breathe more freely, enough to remind herself that she was still here, still in her seat, still unbroken. Mr. Bennett, seated beside her, leaned gently toward her. His voice was warm, steady, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "You know," he said softly, "a seat is just a seat, leather, cushion, metal. But tonight, this seat became something else, a battleground. And you held your ground." Naomi exhaled shakily, her lips parting as though to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she turned her head toward him, eyes shimmering with unspoken gratitude. He nodded, as if he understood what she couldn't say. The curtain at the front of the cabin stirred again. Another attendant, not Victoria this time, emerged. She was younger, her dark hair pulled neatly back, her expression a blend of professionalism and unease. She stopped beside Naomi's seat and lowered her voice. "Miss Carter," she began, her tone cautious, "on behalf of the crew, I want to apologize again for what happened. If there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable for the remainder of the flight, please let me know." Naomi looked up at her. For a moment, she wanted to dismiss the offer, to refuse anything that felt like pity. But then she caught the attendant's eyes. They weren't glazed with superiority or judgment. They were simply human, uneasy. Yes, but sincere. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly. "I just want to be left in peace." The attendant nodded, relief softening her face. "Of course, you have my word." She straightened, glancing toward Mr. Bennett as though silently thanking him for being there too, before returning to the galley. Naomi leaned back into her seat, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time since boarding, she felt space opening around her, not perfect, not entirely safe, but space nonetheless. Her phone buzzed softly again, a message this time. She unlocked it to see a text from her mother. "Hold steady, baby. You're not alone. The world saw. The truth will carry you." Naomi's eyes burned. She tucked the phone away, pressing her palms against her knees, grounding herself in the rhythm of the plane. The businessman across the aisle shifted, finally speaking again, his tone clipped. "You should know. This has set the whole cabin back. People just want peace when they fly." Naomi's pulse quickened, her body tensing. She considered ignoring him, but something in her chest stirred, a refusal to let his words rewrite the narrative. She turned her head toward him, her voice calm but steady. "Peace isn't peace if it's built on silence. What you call a disruption was my dignity being stripped away in public. Would you have preferred I just accepted it quietly?" The man blinked, his mouth opening as though to retort, but no words came. He looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Naomi's heart raced, but a flicker of power coursed through her veins. She hadn't just reclaimed her seat, she had reclaimed her voice. The cabin gradually settled, the hum of conversations fading back into the background rhythm of the flight. Naomi turned toward the window, gazing out at the endless dark sky. She couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the destination, but she felt it out there, a horizon waiting. Her mind drifted. She thought of her mother, pacing somewhere far away but tethered to her by unbreakable love. She thought of Sophia Ramirez, a name she didn't yet know, preparing to stand at the gate in Geneva. She thought of Richard Coleman, somewhere behind the scenes, pulling strings to ensure justice wasn't just a word, but an action. And she thought of herself. Naomi Carter, 20 years old, seated in first class, not because someone handed it to her, but because she had earned it, because she belonged here, whether or not the world was ready to accept that truth. Her eyes closed briefly, exhaustion tugging at her, but even as she drifted near the edge of sleep, one thought anchored her. They had tried to erase her, to make her invisible, and she had refused. When she opened her eyes again, Mr. Bennett was watching her with quiet pride. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he said softly. "Strong, even when you don't feel it, the kind of strength that carries farther than you realize." Naomi swallowed, her throat thick. "I don't always feel strong," she admitted. "No one does," Bennett replied with a gentle smile. "Strength isn't about feeling it. It's about choosing not to break, even when you could." His words settled into her, deep and steady, like roots taking hold. The rest of the cabin gradually slipped back into routine. Glasses clinked, screens flickered with movies. The hum of the engines carried them closer to morning. But for Naomi, the night would never be ordinary again. This seat, this flight, this moment it had marked her. And as she rested her head against the seat back, she realized something else she would carry this story forward, not just as a memory of humiliation, but as a testament. Proof that even in the most confined spaces, justice could carve out a place to land. At 35,000 feet, she had restored more than her seat. She had restored herself. The captain's voice came over the intercom once more, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Geneva. Please return to your seats, fasten your seat belts, and prepare for landing. Local time is 7:15 in the morning, and skies are clear. Clear skies." Naomi let out a slow breath, the words settling over her like a fragile promise. After hours of turbulence, not just in the air but in her very spirit, the idea of clear skies felt almost foreign, almost too much to hope for. The cabin stirred with movement. passengers shifted in their seats, stowing away headphones, folding blankets, adjusting ties and jackets. The rituals of landing were familiar, grounding, and yet beneath them, Naomi could feel the undercurrent of something different. Eyes still flicked toward her. Not all were hostile, not all were kind, but all were aware. She was no longer invisible. Her fingers traced the armrest lightly, grounding herself in the texture of the leather. She could feel her pulse thrumming in her wrists, quick and uneven. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation now ebbed, leaving behind a deep weariness. But along with the exhaustion came a flicker of anticipation. Mr. Bennett leaned toward her, his voice steady as ever. "How are you holding up?" "Naomi." She hesitated. The easy answer, "I'm fine," rose to her lips but faltered before it could escape. For once, she didn't want to pretend. "I'm tired," she admitted softly, "but I'm still here. And that feels like something." Bennett's eyes softened. "Sometimes surviving the storm is the bravest thing you can do." She nodded faintly, letting the words settle. The businessman across the aisle shifted again, but this time he didn't speak. His gaze met hers briefly before darting away, and Naomi thought she saw something new in his eyes. Not apology, not quite, but a recognition he hadn't shown before. Perhaps even he had been moved, if only slightly, by what had unfolded. The curtain at the front of the cabin stirred. The younger attendant, the one who had apologized earlier, emerged again. She moved down the aisle quietly, pausing at Naomi's row. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "the airport manager, Sophia Ramirez, will be waiting at the gate when we land. She asked me to let you know personally." Naomi blinked, her chest tightening. "She'll be there for me." The attendant nodded, her expression earnest. "Yes, she wants to make sure you're taken care of, and that this doesn't happen again." For a moment, Naomi couldn't speak. The weight of everything, the humiliation, the whispers, the captain's announcement. Victoria's suspension crashed against the thought of someone waiting for her on the ground, not to strip her dignity but to affirm it. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back. "Thank you," she whispered. The attendant gave her a faint smile before moving on. Naomi turned back to the window. Far below, the faint outline of mountains appeared, their snowy peaks bathed in early morning light. The horizon glowed with the soft warmth of dawn. It looked peaceful, untouched by the turmoil of the night. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from her mother. "Almost there, baby. Remember who you are. Walk off that plane with your head high." Naomi's throat tightened. She typed back quickly, "She's gone." They suspended her mid-flight. "Mr. Bennett's been with me the whole time. I'll see Sophia soon," almost immediately. Her mother replied, "I knew you'd rise above. I'm proud of you. Always." The engines hummed louder as the plane dipped lower. Naomi pressed her palm against the window, feeling the cool glass against her skin. She thought about how this flight had begun with nothing more than excitement for the journey, for the conference in Geneva, for the chance to prove herself academically. She had boarded with hope. That hope had been bruised, nearly crushed, but it hadn't died. She remembered the moment Victoria had stood above her, trying to erase her presence, the moment her voice had nearly cracked under humiliation, and the moment she had found the strength to stay seated, to say the words, "I belong here." She belonged. "Mr. Bennett broke the silence softly. "When you step off this plane." Naomi, Remember, the world will try again and again to tell you who you are not. Don't let them. You get to decide that." Her chest tightened, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed, but Bennett only smiled kindly. "You remind me of my daughter," he said gently. "She fought her battles too, different ones, but battles all the same. Sometimes I think the world is held together by women like you quietly refusing to yield." Naomi didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, letting the truth of his words wash over her. The seatbelt sign chimed. The plane shuddered softly as the landing gear unfolded beneath them. Passengers straightened, fastening belts, bracing for descent. Naomi's hands tightened against the armrest, her body tensing instinctively. The city of Geneva spread beneath them now, clusters of buildings and winding roads glittering in the morning sun. The plane tilted slightly, lining itself with the runway. Naomi's breath quickened, her chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. She had faced so much in the air, what awaited her on the ground felt just as daunting. The wheels struck the runway with a jolt, the cabin shaking with the force of contact. Naomi's stomach lurched, but she steadied herself, gripping the seat until the plane slowed. Applause broke out from a few passengers accustomed on some flights, but it sounded half-hearted, distracted, as though everyone knew the true drama of the night had already played out long before landing. As the plane taxied, Naomi's heart raced. She thought of Victoria, hidden behind the curtain, stripped of her authority but still present. She thought of Sofia Ramirez, waiting just beyond the jet bridge. She thought of the strangers who had witnessed everything, some supportive, some complicit in their silence. And she thought of herself, still trembling but unbroken. The intercom chimed again. "Welcome to Geneva," the captain announced. "On behalf of the crew, we thank you for flying with us. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." The cabin filled with the familiar rustle of movement seat belts unfastening. Bags pulled from overhead bins. But Naomi stayed seated, her body still, her eyes fixed on the aisle ahead. This wasn't just the end of a flight. It was the beginning of something larger. A reckoning. A truth that couldn't be hidden behind polite smiles or closed curtains. As the plane rolled to a stop, Naomi inhaled deeply, steadying herself for what came next. She could almost hear her mother's voice again. "Walk off that plane with your head high." She was ready. The chime sounded, signaling the end of the journey. Passengers stood, stretching, reaching for their bags, their conversations muted under the hum of the engines winding down. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and tiredness, that familiar post-flight haze. Yet for Naomi, this wasn't the ordinary shuffle of travelers eager to disembark. This was a threshold. Her heart beat fast, not with fear anymore, but with anticipation. She smoothed the fabric of her sweater, her fingers trembling slightly. She thought of her mother's last message. Walk off that plane with your head high. That phrase had become a compass. The aisle clogged quickly, passengers nudging their way forward. Naomi remained seated, waiting, unwilling to be jostled among the impatient. She wanted her exit to mean something. She wanted it to be hers. "Mr." Bennett noticed and gave her a nod, as though to say, "Take your time. You've earned it." When the row ahead finally cleared, Naomi rose. The leather seat sighed as she left it, her legs stiff but steady. She adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped into the aisle. A few passengers glanced her way. Some smiled, tentative but kind. Others quickly looked away, unwilling to hold her gaze, but no one spoke. As she moved toward the front, she caught sight of the curtain. It was still drawn tight across the galley, hiding Victoria Hale from view. Naomi paused briefly, a storm of emotions surging: anger, sadness, even a sliver of pity. But she didn't stop. She had no more words for the woman who had tried to erase her. The jet bridge came into view. The door of the aircraft loomed ahead, open to the bright morning beyond. Naomi's chest tightened as she took those last few steps, the air shifting from recycled cabin oxygen to the crisp breath of Geneva. And there, waiting at the end of the bridge, stood Sophia Ramirez. She was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her posture upright but her expression warm. Her dark eyes met Naomi's instantly, holding them with a steadiness that made Naomi's throat ache. Sophia stepped forward, extending her hand not with formality, but with respect. "Miss Carter," she said firmly, "I'm Sophia Ramirez, airport manager. I'm here for you." Naomi blinked rapidly, gripping Sophia's hand. The strength in that handshake felt like an anchor, pulling her out of the haze of humiliation into something solid, something real. "Thank you," Naomi whispered. Sophia's voice lowered, gentle but resolute. "I want you to know what happened on that flight was unacceptable. It does not reflect who we are, and it will not go unanswered." Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to collapse into those words to let them carry her weight, but she stood tall instead. I didn't want to be erased," she said softly. Sophia's eyes softened. "And you refused. That matters, more than you know." Behind her, 2 staff members waited discreetly, holding clipboards. Sophia glanced toward them, then back to Naomi. "We'll need to take your statement when you're ready. Not now, not until you've had time to breathe. For now, I just want you to know you're safe. You're seen." The words cracked something open inside Naomi. Safe, seen. She swallowed hard, forcing down the tears threatening to rise. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down another message from her mother. "I'm with you, even here. Call me when you can." Naomi typed back quickly, "I'm off the plane. Sophia's here. I'm okay." She slipped the phone away, then looked around. Other passengers streamed past, their eyes flicking between her and Sophia. Some walked faster, eager to escape the scene. Others lingered, clearly curious. One young woman even offered Naomi a faint, supportive smile as she passed. Mr. Bennett emerged last, his steps slow but steady. He paused beside Naomi, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Take care, young lady," he said warmly. "You've shown more strength tonight than some people muster in a lifetime." Naomi's throat thickened. "Thank you for staying by me." He gave her a small nod before continuing on, disappearing into the crowd. Sophia placed a hand lightly on Naomi's back. "Come, let's step aside from the flow of passengers. You deserve a moment without eyes on you." Naomi followed her into a quieter space off the jet bridge. The sudden hush felt like a balm. She drew in a shaky breath, finally exhaling the tension she'd carried since boarding. Sophia studied her face carefully. "You're young," she said softly, "too young to be carrying this weight. But I see fire in you. Naomi, don't let this scar you. Let it sharpen you." Naomi met her gaze, her chest rising and falling slowly. "It already has," she admitted. "I don't think I'll ever forget it." "You shouldn't," Sophia replied gently, "but you can decide how it defines you." Naomi let those words settle deep inside her. She thought of the night sky outside the plane, endless and unbroken. She thought of the whispers that had tried to reduce her, the indifference that had tried to silence her, and she thought of her own voice, steady even when trembling, refusing to yield. She lifted her head. I'm ready to make a statement, not just for me, for anyone who's ever been treated like they didn't belong. Sophia's expression softened into pride. Then let's begin when you're ready. For the first time since the ordeal began. Naomi smiled, small, tentative, but real. She walked with Sophia down the bright corridor, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Each step felt lighter than the last, each breath steadier. She wasn't leaving her pain behind. She was carrying it forward, reshaped into something stronger. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at her mother's name, then back up at the horizon beyond the glass. With her free hand, she pressed the phone close to her heart, as though carrying her mother's voice inside her chest. And, with her head high, Naomi Carter stepped fully into the morning. And so, Naomi walked off that plane not as a victim, but as a voice, a reminder that dignity cannot be reassigned like a seat number, and respect is not optional. What started as humiliation became a moment of reckoning, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Her story leaves us with questions we cannot ignore. How many times do people suffer in silence, their worth questioned because of the color of their skin? How often does indifference allow injustice to linger? And most importantly, what would we do if we were there? Would we look away? Or would we stand beside the one being wronged? Naomi's courage challenges us all. To see, to speak, to refuse silence. May her journey remind us to honor one another with compassion, and to confront prejudice wherever it hides, even in the aisles of an airplane. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because together we can carry these voices farther and ensure that the next time dignity is tested, it will not be stolen in silence.